Hello and welcome to Haunted Tales of the Ohio Statehouse. My name is Katie and I work at this historic building. The Ohio Statehouse is over 150 years old, with its construction starting in 1839, originally by penitentiary workers. Being 150 plus years old, the Statehouse has seen many important things: rights given to Ohioans, important political historic speeches, as well as, on occasion, a funeral. As historians, we believe that objects help to tell a story. But what if these objects do more than just help to tell the story? What if they hold on to the energy of the people and events that have happened in the past? And what if they help to keep the stories alive in more ways than we know? What if this place and these objects serve as a conduit for the energy of events and people gone before? And what if those people are still here in some way, trying to tell their own story? I myself have had multiple strange occurrences in this building that I cannot explain. Perhaps if you join us on a journey through this building, you may be able to see these stories come alive. The Ohio Penitentiary, even though it has since been torn down, still has a creepy hold on the Ohio Statehouse in more than one unsettling way.
As one of the oldest buildings in Columbus, the walls of the Ohio Statehouse have heard it all. Throughout its long history, a whole host of characters have convened here. It is, of course, the people's house. It's no surprise, then, that along with the impressive feats that have been accomplished here, there have also been some shocking and hair-raising tales that accompany those who used to wander these halls. One gruesome rumor was perpetuated by former Governor Joseph B. Foraker. In September 1886, Governor Foraker spoke at the Metropolitan Opera House in Columbus while campaigning for Republican politicians who were running in the upcoming November election. In an attempt to distinguish his party from the competition, Governor Foraker leveled a bold claim. His predecessor, Democratic Governor George Hoadley, had appointed some shady characters to oversee the state penitentiary. By the time Governor Foraker had appointed a new prison warden, the complex had fallen into a state of disrepair. But that wasn't the worst of it. Foraker claimed that one inmate, Frederick W. Nye, contacted him with a signed affidavit proclaiming that he had been ordered to assist two doctors in the prison hospital in making canes out of dead prisoners' skin. Nye's services were required in stripping skin from the backs of deceased prisoners, drying out the skin, and preparing it for use on the canes. In his sworn statement, Nye contended that he had made 5 canes, 2 for each of the doctors, and Nye kept one for himself, which he later passed on to the governor as proof of the scandal. Foraker's speech was published in newspapers all across the state of Ohio. Democrats, of course, declared the ghastly allegations to be false, and the doctors said to be involved in the scandal staunchly denied the claims. But the rumors persisted. According to a doctor entrusted by Foraker to analyze Nye's cane, the cane was produced using 3 types of skin, 2 from different people and 1 from an animal. Nye's story was also corroborated by other inmates and prison workers who noted the foul stench coming from his workshop. So, was there any truth to these claims, or was it simply a way to drum up controversy before an election? Certainly, it was not uncommon for prison workers to collect little trophies from deceased inmates. Stories about pieces of skin and hair were widely circulated. We might never know if prison officials sanctioned the making of human skin canes, but the story stayed front and center for many months, and the governor, who made such bold and sinister claims, earned a new nickname, Skin Cane Foraker.
Attics have long been thought of as a hiding place for spirits and ghosts. Join our historic site manager, Chris, on a journey up to the cupola to see what lurks there.
The Yorkshire Museum in the United Kingdom issued a challenge a couple of years ago. You see, they had a curious object in their museum collections. The object was a 3rd to 4th century Roman woman's hair bun made of real hair, complete with the pins still sticking through it. The challenge, which was issued to other museums, was, can you beat it? That is, do you have an object that is creepier? Different museums responded enthusiastically. One museum reported a petrified sheep's heart punctured by nails. Another museum reported a blood-soaked doll with a missing eye. Yet another museum reported a particularly gruesome, smiling executioner's mask. And finally, another museum reported a decapitated cat, curiously posed, plucking a harp. Now that is curious, and I thought, we have a cat-related object in our Statehouse collections. And as I began to read more and more about curious museum collections, I found that many of them had deceased cats in their inventory. And most of these cats were found within the walls of buildings. In the museum community, they're called concealed cats. Evidence suggests that the custom of cat concealment began in the 13th century and continued into the modern era. Originating in Europe, the practice was brought to North America by immigrants. But why? Scholars on the subject offer up 3 possible reasons. 1, a foundation sacrifice. 2, an attempt to scare off vermin. Or 3, accidental entrapment. Now let's take a look at our concealed cat. This turn-of-the-century shoebox was found during the renovation of the Ohio Statehouse in the 1990s. The label on the box reads, "The Excelsior Shoe Company, Fine Shoes, Portsmouth, Ohio." And pencil writing on the label seems to indicate that the shoes inside were an 8.5. Only there were no shoes inside when this box was pulled from within the walls of the Statehouse. Instead, what is contained inside are the disarticulated skeletal remains of a cat. We must ask ourselves, why was this deceased cat placed in this shoebox and left at the Ohio Statehouse? If we consult the previously mentioned list, this is definitely an intentional placement, so accidental entrapment doesn't count. An attempt to scare off vermin? Well, as you can see, this hole in the side of the box was most likely made by vermin, probably a mouse or a rat, and it helped itself to what was left of the cat. Certainly it didn't leave us much to take a look at. So that only leaves foundation sacrifice. But this cat was not found in the foundation of the Ohio Statehouse. In fact, this curiously concealed cat was found about as far away from the foundation as you get without leaving the building. To find where this concealed cat was placed, we have to go up. Since 1861, when the Ohio Statehouse was first complete, visitors have climbed these stairs to get to the observation deck of the cupola. Once arriving at the observation deck, visitors are greeted with a beautiful view of the city of Columbus spreading out before them and reaching into the countryside. This is the observation deck of the cupola. And as I mentioned earlier, the shoebox and remains of the cat were found during the renovation of the Ohio Statehouse. They were actually found on the inside of this wall while they were doing ventilation work. But to really get an idea of what it looks like within the walls, we need to go up to what we like to call the tippy top. Above us is the skylight of the drum, and below is the interior of the dome. And if you look down, you can see between the walls and the structure. And perhaps a former worker at the Ohio Statehouse left behind this cat over a century ago, or perhaps a visitor snuck up the stairs, leaving behind a beloved companion, placing them between the Capitol walls as an honored resting place for all eternity. For whatever the reason that this curiously concealed cat from the cupola was placed here, it still resides within the walls of the Ohio Statehouse in our museum collections. Thank you for joining us, and happy Halloween.
The Ohio Statehouse took 22 years to build, and as such, it only makes sense that each stone would have a story to tell.
The Ohio Statehouse, completed in 1861, is one of the oldest buildings here in the city of Columbus. With such a long and storied history, if these stones and bricks could talk, they would have many interesting tales to tell. Some stones in particular would have especially chilling stories. For example, these stones that I am standing on. These particular stones came from the floor of the Columbus State Hospital, originally known as the Ohio Hospital for the Insane. The first institution of its kind, the Lunatic Asylum of Ohio, was completed in 1838. It was located about a mile from the Ohio Statehouse on East Broad Street and was designed by Nathan B. Kelly, who later became the architect of the Capitol, and who was instrumental in designing the building that we're in today. Prison labor was also crucial to the building of the Ohio Statehouse. Many of the bricks and the stones that are around me were worked on by prisoners of the state of Ohio. And many of those same prisoners had also worked on the lunatic asylum. The two structures share a strong connection. Literally, the same hands built both. However, unlike the Ohio Statehouse, the asylum no longer stands. It was burned down in 1868 on November 18th in a deadly blaze that killed 6 patients. Instead of rebuilding on that same East Broad Street site, then Governor Rutherford B. Hayes convinced the state to sell that plot and buy a new one on the west end of Columbus. That plot was purchased from William Sullivan, who had originally owned Capitol Square, where the Statehouse is located today. The foundation for the new hospital was laid on July 4th, 1870, and the building was completed exactly 7 years later. The Columbus Hospital for the Insane, as the new building was originally called, was built according to the Kirkbride plan, which emphasized large open spaces and fresh air. Originally designed to house 850 patients, by 1935 it held almost 3,000. With almost 3 times the number of patients than it was designed for, it would have been impossible for the spaces to be used as they had been intended. Overcrowding was likely a serious issue. Underfunding was likely an issue as well. According to a report from 1895, that year the number of patients had increased by 25%, but funding had remained stagnant. Death was a common occurrence at the Columbus State Hospital. Many patients spent decades confined to the campus, only to eventually succumb to their mental illnesses. Many others died of communicable diseases that were common, especially in the early years of the hospital's history. The spread of disease would have been exacerbated by the aforementioned overcrowding issue. One medical writer in the 1890s estimated that 95% of the deaths were due to preventable illnesses. It must have felt like a nightmare to watch disease ravage the halls, all while being trapped by walls both physical and mental. As Dr. Kirkbride himself noted, even the asylums that provided the best possible care for the time, which for decades included things such as lobotomies and harsh electroshock therapy, isolation would have been an ever-present issue. As he said, it is among the most painful features of insanity that in its treatment, so many are compelled to leave their families. Feelings of isolation, depression, confusion would have been ever present in the asylum. By the early 1980s, the Columbus State Hospital was in such a severe state of disrepair that the cost to restore it was virtually insurmountable. So too had public asylums and hospitals for the insane fallen out of favor. Thus, by 1985, the Columbus State Hospital was closed, and by 1996, it had been completely demolished. However, this floor was saved and brought here to the Ohio Statehouse during the Capitol restoration of the 1990s. Did spirits of the more than a century's worth of patients from the Columbus State Hospital follow along? Is it merely coincidence that staff have heard voices and even their names whispered to them in this very space? I'll leave that to you to decide.
We hope you enjoyed your journey through the Ohio Statehouse and learned a little of the spooky history that lurks within.